Okay, so we've seen version control, we've seen automated builds. So once we get to the point of having these in place, then we can actually go and build every commit. So the reason we can sort of do this is that we've made it really cheap to do the build now. Okay, it's one click, or even better, one thing that gets triggered. Why would we do this? Well, if we are going and thinking about our commits as changes to be integrated into the system, isn't it nice if we can actually check that each of those integrations was successful? If you do 100 commits a day, which isn't infeasible if you're breaking your commits into sort of nice, self-contained, this is one bug fix, this is kind of one feature change, and you have a reasonably sizable team, you can easily get numbers of commits like this. Then, it can be quite hard to know where the breakage was if you're doing daily builds. If you're doing a build sort of every single commit, then you can say, oh, it was exactly at this commit that the build got broken. How do you do this? Well, pretty much every version control system has this thing called a post-commit hook. It's something that just lets you run a little bit of code, or run an action, or run some program as soon as a commit gets made to the repository. So you can just have a system where you trigger your build to happen as soon as the commit is made, every single commit. And as we've seen, you can get your build script to know which revision to build. So you don't get sort of race conditions and so forth. Now you don't have to build all of that yourself. We've seen this final builder server. There's another one called Team City. There's cruisecontrol.net. So there's a whole bunch of different solutions you can go and take a look at. And they all kind of have their sort of evaluation versions that you can go look at, play with, say, does this suit us? But it's much nicer to just get something that already works, because of course, yeah, sure, you can roll your own, you can do it, but is it really the best use of time? One thing that's worth mentioning is that just because you're building every single revision doesn't mean you want to always push that latest revision out to your, say, testing environment. So if you sort of have a test environment where your QA team are sort of working, you probably only want to update that, say, once per hour. On the other hand, if you can sort of pull it off, a nice thing to do is to keep all the last builds that you've made, say, for the last 24 hours or so, available in separate locations. So then you can just present a page and say, oh, go and sort of browse around the site on this particular commit. And then if you get a bug reported, you can actually get a sort of a commit number with it as well. So you can say, oh, okay, the QA department discovered the bug in this commit, and they say it wasn't there in this previous revision. And then if you actually can write a test case or some automated way of detecting it, a lot of version control systems have a tool called Bisect, which will actually do a binary search and go and find the exact revision where the regression was introduced, if you give it sort of 2 starting points, which is really neat. One of the things that we do in the Pulse project is we actually have a bot. We hang out on the IRC channel a lot to sort of communicate, and we actually do have half-hourly builds, or I think it's once per hour at the moment. We've totaled a bit of it. But these get updated every hour, and it's the latest thing from version control. And it's kind of nice because since it's a compiler, you just feed in a little snippet of code, and it runs it, and you sort of instantly get the output. And a lot of the bug tickets we file these days are actually filed around people on the channel showing the bug, then working out the smallest piece of code which triggers the bug, and submitting it into the bug system just as a sort of copy-paste of the error log and the discussion that surrounded it. So this is really nice. And it's also kind of nice because if you go and implement a new language feature, you can show it off to everyone on the channel. But we found this very good. The one thing that made this enormously more valuable is when we also started getting it to tell us what version it was running, what commit it was running when we sort of got the answer back from it. So it's kind of nice to think about ways of making builds available and easy to test as well. So at this point, we've got our version control, we've got builds being done automatically, and we're building every time we commit. Well, that's kind of nice, but there's no real point doing this third step in a sense unless we actually make the results of the build available. Now, everyone should be able to sort of get at this information. So the ideal is that you can sort of look and see, okay, did the build I just did, did the commit I just did, introduce a problem? And if it failed, then you really want to be able to sort of go and view a log and say, okay, it failed here, probably because I screwed this thing up. The sort of idea here is that we're getting fast feedback. So if I cause a problem and someone comes and tells me about it 10 minutes later, then it's like, oh yeah, okay, I get it, I'll go fix it. If I sort of wander into the office at 9 a.m. the next morning and I haven't even had my coffee and someone from QA jumps on me and says, oh no, you made a huge fail yesterday. It's like, no, go away, okay? So, fast feedback is good. It's also about cost reduction because context switches are actually expensive. I'm sure you sort of recognize this yourself. When you're thinking about a particular problem or you've just been thinking about it, it's really nice if you can sort of know the problems and go and fix them while it's all in your head. Even the next day, you're probably moved on to the next hard problem that you have to solve, and you're not sort of thinking so much about the one you did yesterday. If it's a week later, or 2 weeks, or a month, then it's even harder to sort of go back and remember exactly what you were doing. So this sort of fast feedback thing is really nice. There's various ways you can do it. You can get a sort of web page, but it's needing a manual refresh, so it's easy to ignore. So that's maybe not quite so good. You could do an RSS feed, so just publish an XML feed of all the latest builds, and people's reader can maybe pop something up. Various tools like TeamCity can have some sort of tray notification thing, or you could just make it really cool. You could have sort of a lava lamp that lights up when your build fails. I heard of one development office in, I think it was Moscow, where they actually had got the traffic light from the street. Well, I guess they probably bought it rather than nabbed it. But they sort of had this in their office. So when the build failed, then the traffic light went to red, which is kind of cute. You could also do an automated email to the person who broke the build. And if it's a good one, then it'll say like the sort of revision number and give you a link to the log that failed. If it's a bad one, it'll just tell you circa. If it's really bad, someone will have tried to make it cute, and it'll be funny the first time, and then you'll hate it forevermore. So don't do that. Finally, with all of that done, you could then go and actually automate test runs of these builds as well. So this is where we go from a little bit of sort of knowledge that it built okay, so it's sort of okay in that sense, to it built okay and it passed all these tests, so at least this load of things work. How many of you have some automated tests for your code? Okay, I'm sorry, I think Hardy already harassed you about this morning, right? So how many of you have at least 10% coverage, would you say? Okay, 50%? So, if I could sum up why we do testing in one word, I'd say that tests are all about confidence. Tests are about having confidence to say that I refactored this bit of code, or I added this feature, or I fixed this bug, and I've got a test to actually prove it. So, one of the sort of nastiest things we have to do is get a pile of code and have to go and change something, and then it's like, how do I know that I haven't gone and broken as much as I fixed? If we have tests, we can sort of have some confidence to say, well, all of these tests of the code still pass. So once you're automating your tests, you could just automate running the test suite as well. So you can just, for each single commit, run the suite, and you then get the results back. So not only do you know it built, but you know it passed the tests, or sort of failed the tests, or whatever. So you can get much more fine-grained results. So not only does it build, but it probably actually works as well. This is sort of my experience of what happens when you have a good test suite catching regressions. You get a test and it catches some mistake you've made in the code. And you sort of say, oh, I'm really glad it did that because someone else would have found that 2 weeks later and it would have been really hard to work out what broke it because it was in an unrelated bit of the project. So then you're like, having tests is good. So you get more motivated to write tests, which means then you have more tests, so you have more chance of finding bugs, and you sort of get into this very virtuous circle of actually having tests and getting value out of them. If you write tests and you never run them, what's the point of having written them? Okay? So it's really good to sort of get your tests into a state where you can take advantage of them and actually get them to give you some value. So let's review. Continuous integration, as we've seen, has some costs. You have to get things set up. You need to maintain the build scripts. You have to make them in the first place. If you're going to build every single revision, then you're probably going to need some hardware. Alternatively, you can push it off out into the cloud, which is kind of a nice idea. You might need some software licenses. And one of the really important things, if you're going to do this, you're probably going to kind of get some benefits out of it. That's the point. But there's no sort of point doing that and having like one person on the team know how to see the test results or get emailed when the build's broken. It needs to be something that sort of everyone can get involved with. What do you win? Well, you know where you really stand, okay? Continuous integration keeps you honest. It keeps you at a point where you know exactly what changes have been integrated into the main branch, you know they build, you know the tests are passing, and so forth. You lower the cost of producing a build, and thus your release, so you can actually save something there. You get early warnings of breakages, so you don't serve so much cost of having to do all the context switches. And kind of importantly, I think, we can actually go about doing our development and have a whole lot more confidence about what we're doing, which makes us feel better and is going to help us to make much more awesome software. Thank you very much.